10 years ago this month, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 took off from Kuala Lumpur for its destination, Beijing. In less than 2 hours, it disappeared from all tracking systems and has never been found. I'm Larry Fedorik, and this is Later That Same Life. Each week on my podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 12, Chapter 6.
Flight MH370.
It was March 8th, 2014, when MH370 left Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, 227 passengers and 12 crew. Its last communication with air traffic control came 38 minutes after takeoff, and it was also lost from their secondary tracking system. The flight was tracked by the Malaysian military primary radar system for about another hour. It was veering off course westward, then just disappeared. It remains the biggest mystery in the history of aviation. Previous to this, the most notable unanswered question in flight was whatever happened to Amelia Earhart.
Here's a look back into yesterday at aviation's leading lady, Miss Amelia Earhart.
In 1937, not quite yet 40 years of age, Amelia Earhart was among the most famous people in the world. And never mind that flight was still in its first generation, and that women of the day were considered best suited as wives and homemakers. Amelia Earhart had already flown solo across the Atlantic and the Pacific, plus had many other aviation milestones. There was much excitement surrounding her announcement of her new plan: fly solo around the world. No plane in the day had the capacity or the speed to do it all in one flight, so there would be fuel stops. On May 21st, 1937, Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, took off east from Oakland, California, in their twin-engine Lockheed Electra. 22,000 miles and 43 days later, they landed in Papua New Guinea. Only 3 flights remained. First to a dot on the map known as Howland Island for a quick refuel. Then on to Honolulu and back to Oakland. The last communication, a distress call, came July 2nd, 1937, during that flight to Howland Island, running low on fuel, bad weather. Then, nothing. Earhart and Noonan never made it to that small island refuel stop. Even now, pushing 90 years on, the mystery has never been completely solved. In 1937, a search was launched immediately, but to no avail. You might be comforted to know that the conspiracy theorists were alive and well even in the day. Some claim to have heard SOS communications from Earhart days and weeks after her disappearance. Rumors quickly spread that Amelia was on a mission personally directed by U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and was shot down by the Japanese. Others eventually claimed she had been captured and survived Japanese prison camps until after the war, when she was returned to the U.S., assumed a new identity, and lived out a quiet life in New Jersey. A more plausible theory was that she crash-landed on the tiny Pacific island of Nikumaroro, where human remains were found in 1940, a human skull and 12 other bone fragments. Also found was a box made to hold a surveying sextant and a small bottle of a British medicinal liqueur. They must be Earhart's bones, many thought, and they were analyzed by a British doctor who was in the area. Then the bones disappeared. They have not been seen since, simply adding to the mystery. And of course, the rumor mill. The original record of the bone analysis does still exist, and in 2016, the International Group of Historic Aircraft Recovery, along with experts from the University of Tennessee, were able to use that original report to virtually recreate those bones in a computer model. From there, they ran measurements through an extensive forensic database and could determine with at least a 90% accuracy rate that the bones came from a taller-than-average woman of European descent, Amelia Earhart. Bravo, science! Plus, for decades, dozens and dozens of explorers and adventurers have tried to help solve this mystery. Only a few weeks ago, an independent team using the Howland Island flight path and Nikomaroro theory were able to use state-of-the-art equipment to capture a sonar image that resembles the Lockheed Electra at the bottom of the ocean. It's on the ocean floor about 100 miles from Howland Island and 16,000 feet deep. That's deeper than the Titanic. Using underwater drones, they are trying to get a closer look. A deep dive, literally.
This was to have been her greatest achievement, a sky dash of 28,000 miles. Then to a waiting world came news of disaster as the plane failed to reach tiny Howland Island in mid-Pacific.
So Amelia Earhart, a mystery, yes, but we knew the mission, we knew the flight plan, we knew about low fuel and bad weather. We have strong scientific evidence of location consistent with that information. It's taken almost 90 years, but as far as Amelia Earhart goes, we now know more than we don't know. We cannot say that about flight MH370. 10 years ago, it was there. Then it vanished. It was thought impossible that a modern Boeing 777 commercial airline with 239 souls on board could just disappear, until it did. As experts have said, we will never know what happened until we find the plane. We must find the plane for the sake of aviation and for the sake of humanity. It's difficult to understand how anything in today's shrinking world can literally fall off the radar. The world is full of cell towers and radar dishes, fiber optic cable, beeping ocean buoys, not to mention approximately 10,000 satellites in space, keeping tabs on this, that, and the other. You and I can't walk across the street to the bank without being tracked by several camera systems. We can't even tap our smartphones without our data being collected. We can't click like or order home delivery without the information being extrapolated. I'm seeing ads now for stuff I just talked about with a friend. Spooky. Sometimes I wish I could just disappear. Yet, there's flight MH370. This happened. The governments of Malaysia, China, and Australia initially spent hundreds of millions of dollars on searches, calling off explorations in 2017. We thought we had a big clue about a year after the disappearance, when MH370 airplane parts washed ashore on the small French island of Réunion in the western Indian Ocean. Remember, we learned the term flaperon. They found a flaperon, an almost 3-meter-long piece of the tailing edge of the wing. It is used to increase drag upon landing or help the plane bank in the air. Réunion Island was hundreds, possibly thousands of kilometers from where MH370 was last heard from. Well, wouldn't they simply retrace the ocean currents backwards and you could find the crash site? They tried that. It's not that simple. So let's go back to March 8th, 2014, to Kuala Lumpur, and let's do a timeline, a step-by-step of what we know, what little we've learned over this past decade. At 12:42 a.m., March 8th, 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 takes to the air for a 5.5-hour overnight flight to Beijing. Beijing is almost due north from Kuala Lumpur. It achieves cruising altitude and stays on course. At this point, the Boeing 777 should be on autopilot, basically flying itself. Any extreme changes would not happen without a person being involved. About 40 minutes into the flight, It's handed over from Malaysian Air Traffic Control to Vietnamese ATC. This is the last communication we heard from MH370.
Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370 maintaining level 350. Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
Good night, Malaysian 370. Right after that, the plane's transponder goes dark. We all know what a transponder does. In aviation, it transmits an airplane's location, height, speed, and more back to officials on the ground. Transponder is off. Gone. Did it fail? Was it destroyed? Shut off on purpose? We don't know. There is a redundancy system called ACARS. The acronym stands for Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS. It too was suddenly down, not available. MH370 was flying in the dark, literally and figuratively. Could all communication systems fail simultaneously? By coincidence? Most experts say impossible. And if they did, why wouldn't the pilots resort to backups like VHF or UHF radio? Even a cell phone. By the way, I will address the cell phone question a bit later in this podcast, but for now, no communication with that flight. Not from built-in systems or manual backups. Dark. In that first hour and a half, two incredible things happened that we learned about much later. First, Vietnam Air Traffic Control contacted Malaysian Air Traffic Control and said, hey, Flight 370, they handed off to us, yet now we can't find them anywhere. We called the plane, no answer. We called other planes to call the plane, no answer. Any help? Oh, really? Well, let us check, said Malaysian Air Traffic Control. So they checked their radar and they say, oh yeah, here we have it. It's right here. It's on course to Beijing. All looks normal. All right, thanks, says Vietnam. We'll double check our systems again, I guess. And they did whatever they did. They tap on the screen, unplug it, plug it back in. Well, they still couldn't find it. But hey, the Malaysian guys have it tracked. So, meanwhile, a crucial 90 minutes passes before Malaysian officials call them back. Hey, yeah, that radar report we told you about? Well, as it turns out, we were watching a systems simulation of Flight 370, not the actual plane. We don't know where it is either. Whoops. So now it's back to, we have a missing flight. So MH370 may not be communicating, but gee, you'd think somebody somewhere would be able to see it. This is the second amazing thing that happened. Malaysian military, and this was found out many days later, had picked up the flight on their radar. And at this point, they pick up the beeps heading more towards Malaysian airspace, aircraft identity technically undetermined, and approaching at over 500 miles an hour. Yet, somehow, they didn't report this to anyone. They didn't contact anyone. Or scramble jets to get a first-hand look at what might even be a perceived threat to their nation. They decide it's no threat, that it's friendly, and they do nothing. They go about their day. Two crucial errors: Malaysian Air Traffic Control and Malaysian military. Two errors that, if avoided, could have provided some important time for authorities to jump into action. It wasn't long before news of a missing flight was making headlines worldwide. It certainly didn't arrive in Beijing in the early morning.
The more urgent question is, where is the plane and its passengers?
How much more credible does it have to get?
I don't think you could get more precise.
Where is Malaysia Airlines Flight 370?
It was declared missing. Then, lost. Unprecedented search efforts began, even though no one was really sure where to look. So they looked along the planned flight path. They also looked west based on that military radar information. There was nothing. Weeks later, what was thought to be a major turning point. The Inmarsat data. Inmarsat. I-N-M-A-R-S-A-T. It's a British satellite company that provides telephone and other communication services. Unexpectedly, they were drawn into this story. Researchers at Inmarsat noticed that MH370 had exchanged what are known as digital handshakes with their satellites. So the plane was not totally dark. It exchanged these signals with Inmarsat satellites. Suddenly, investigators had hard evidence that the plane was in the air a lot longer than they initially believed, and that the plane, on a northern route to Beijing, had turned west and then south, and had flown for approximately 6.5 hours. Well, where do you look now? This new information potentially would see the demise of the flight in the southern Indian Ocean. And these are some of the roughest seas on Earth, and an area of brutal winters. As one investigator put it, this area is about as remote as you can get and still be on the planet. Wow. Now, the digital data may have helped tell them where to look, but the South Indian Ocean is not exactly a pleasure cruise. Plus, who now searches? Who pays? During this decade, especially in the first few years on, there was not a shortage of theories. It was a hijacking. The plane was shot down by enemy forces. After all, almost all the passengers were Chinese citizens. The plane was on a tiny island where all were being held captive by terrorists. And of course, it was space aliens who took the plane, the passengers, and crew far away to their galaxy. Oh, it was wild, and of course, not helpful. The serious theorists did point to the fact that a colossal mechanical failure of all communication systems simultaneously, along with the massive change in course, likely could not have happened without some human intervention. Okay, who then? Well, they started with the two men in charge of flying the aircraft, the last two men known to be at the controls of MH370. The pilot, 27-year-old Farik Hamid, hailed as a superstar, new and upcoming, the best they had. The elder captain, Zahir Ahmed Shah, was a career aviator. Together, they say, you couldn't have asked for a more skilled and talented flight crew. But, they found a homemade flight simulator in Zahir's house. They tore that apart. They investigated the both of them. As one official said, the more they searched, the less they found. Zero evidence that either of these two would be motivated to be a rogue pilot. So among the rest of the crew and the passengers, there had to be someone who intervened. Perhaps shut down all the systems and redirected the flight. But to what motivation? They found no one on board the least bit suspicious. Mystery deepens. Two obvious big questions have been asked. One, what are the so-called black boxes? How come we haven't found the black boxes? These devices record all flight data, and in case of a mishap, they send out a signal to help locate them. Yes, well, remember that for weeks they were looking in the wrong place. They searched visually and digitally in the South China Sea and the Pacific, not the Southern Indian Ocean. These black boxes eventually stop transmitting. If they are ever found, the information will be invaluable, but first they have to find them. Again, to quote one of the investigators, it's not about finding a needle in a haystack. First, they must find the haystack. Second question that comes up often, why weren't there any cell phone calls from the plane? Either casual conversation calls to family and friends, or calls from anyone suspecting something untoward during the flight. Well, it was an overnight flight. Many people, I'm sure, were sleeping, plus who are you going to call at 2 a.m? It's dark over water. It would be difficult for an average flyer to discern change from course and direction, but most likely the plane was flying too high and too fast to be picked up by cell towers, especially since it now flew west and south into a remote part of the planet. The other popular theory for a while was that somehow the plane's cabin was depressurized due to a system failure. This would have rendered all on board quickly unconscious, and eventually they would even perish. The plane would become like an unmanned flight, eventually running out of fuel and crashing into the ocean. That happened in 2005 on a Helios flight from Cyprus to the Czech Republic, where the crew forgot to set the pressurizing system to auto. As the plane hit altitude, almost everyone on board went into something called general hypoxia, making it a ghost flight, eventually crashing into Greece. Yeah, I guess that could have happened on MH370. Although at the very least, a backup system should tell the pilots that they would have to go on oxygen and lower the flight to a more breathable level. And nothing in that theory would address the issue of the massive communication system failure. It is also possible for a pilot or a captain to disable pressurization, but again, human criminal intervention? Everyone on that flight was cleared. A mystery still. A mystery as deep as the ocean. Since official major search efforts were called off, there's been less interest from the general public, but not from flight investigators, and certainly not the thousands of people who lost friends and relatives on March 8, 2014. Even in this relatively short time, new, better search technology has been developed. Marine biologists have studied the crustaceans attached to the debris found on Reunion Island to help pinpoint where those types of crustaceans may reside. Many have called for new searches to begin. They feel they can still find the haystack. I hope they do. As I said earlier, for humanity and for aviation. More wreckage, the black boxes. Eventually, we would know what happened, perhaps even how. But when it comes to the disappearance of MH370, we may never know why.
Later That Same Life is written, produced, and voiced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.